Alright guys, how's it going? I haven't really talked a whole lot about Navi, and it's not been for a lack of desire, but for a lack of decent information. So I think the best way to start this one is to recap some of the little information that we do have. So let's go way back 10 months ago over to PC Games N, who interviewed David Wang and Scott Herkelman of the Radeon Technologies Group. In their article, AMD's Navi will be a traditional monolithic GPU, not a multi-chip module. I've gone over this one a few times in the past, so I'll be brief this time. In a nutshell, the Radeon guys appeared to kill stone dead any hope of Navi being, and to quote David, crossfire on a single package. So in other words, there's no way it'll be using more than one GPU in the gaming world. But Scott Herkelman followed up by saying, in professional and instinct workloads, multi-GPU is considerably different. We are all in on that side. Now what needs to be noted is that nowhere in this entire interview did either David or Scott actually say Navi would be monolithic. That is, one piece of silicon. Navi can still be a chiplet-based microarchitecture in much the same way EPYC and Ryzen 3000 series are. And by that, I basically mean we'd see a 2-chiplet design for Navi, one 7nm chiplet with GPU cores, and one 14nm chiplet with the memory controllers, I/O, display engine, etc. So I hope that clears up that point finally. Monolithic literally means it is formed of a single large block of stone, or in this case, silicon. Chiplets are the opposite of monolithic in that you're breaking up a monolithic chip into smaller pieces that still act as one larger piece. MCM, or multi-chip module, simply means there is more than one chip on a package. It's a bit of an older term now. Multi-GPU, crossfire, etc. means that there is more than one GPU acting as one GPU. So when David talked about crossfire on a single package, he meant more than one of these GPU core chiplets on the same package, combining to act as one chip. That is not happening with Navi. At least, it won't be on the desktop. Now clearly though, none of this means that Navi will be a chiplet-based microarchitecture either, with a single GPU chiplet and I/O die on the same package. I'm just pointing out that nothing David or Scott said in this PC Games N article discounts that possibility. Navi being chiplet-based was, first of all, my speculation in the Evolving Masterplan video. And then I talked about it a few days later when I was given the leaked information on Ryzen 3000 and a little bit on Navi. In that Evolving Masterplan video, I talked about what my expectations were for a chiplet-based Navi near the end, when I speculated that there would be a consumer I/O die holding many different types of memory controllers. And one reason for that was another PC Games article they released a week previous to their one on Navi being monolithic. That one was titled, AMD Navi GPUs don't have to be tied to HBM2. It can also work very well with GDDR6. When asked the question, does that mean, as with Nvidia, that the high end of AMD's graphics stack, the data center, heavily compute-focused cards, remain tied to HBM2, while the gaming cards shift to GDDR6? Again, the Radeon Technology Group's Scott Herkelman replied, I would say it's opportunistic. It depends on how we see our roadmap, how we would like to play it out with some of our partners, and the innovations we want to have and what we want to do in the professional space. But we are fully committed to HBM, and we are going to be fully committed to GDDR6, and let the best solution win. And David Wang followed up with, like Scott says, it is definitely opportunistic. But we have a baseline technology and our graphics architecture is scalable, is flexible, and it can work well with HBM effectively, and can also work very well with GDDR6. And this entire article just made me believe strongly in Navi being chiplet-based. And this flexibility in memory compatibility was likely down to the I/O die being a combined memory hub. Later on though, over at Twitter, when discussing that Evolving Masterplan video, a poster tweeted something that made even more sense than my speculated large memory hub. They made the point that rather than having a single larger I/O die holding every kind of memory controller, why not just have different I/O dies depending on the segment, or even have them custom made? And that got me thinking, how exactly do you get this flexible architecture David Wang talked about otherwise? It's not really flexible when you're designing monolithic chips for each segment. Data center, mobile, desktop, all-in-ones, game consoles, and in each case you have to redesign for both HBM and GDDR6? Think about how many different designs that would be. Actually, let me speculate and shove it all into a table. For high-performance computing in the data center, presumably you're looking at HBM2 only, and also Navi 20, or Big Navi, which comes later and it should be around the 300 watt mark. Cost isn't an issue here, so HBM2 isn't an issue. But what about on the desktop? AMD have been stuck in a bad position of having cards that aren't particularly great at gaming, yet still saddled with very expensive HBM2. For Big Navi to be any kind of success, it needs to use GDDR6. It won't be as power efficient, but it will be a hell of a lot cheaper than if it comes with HBM2. Covering the entire mid-range, we have Navi 10, a chip which should come in around the 150 watts mark. That'll be coming to the desktop with GDDR6 for sure, and I speculated that it would likely be the chip for the next gen game consoles as well. I'm sure you can imagine scenarios where HBM2 would be useful though, for example in Apple products, or in premium notebooks, much like what Intel did with Kaby Lake G. At the low end and Navi 12, we're covering entry-level desktop, APUs, and perhaps Apple again, and some all-in-ones. Here's the thing, you'd normally just use the cheapest memory in the lowest end GPUs, for the simple reason that it's large volume, low margin. The problem here is designing a small GPU specifically for the smaller volumes like all-in-ones or premium notebooks simply isn't viable. And that's really why we don't see small GPUs with HBM. It's not worth designing one specifically for that market, but that doesn't mean that it wouldn't be useful and there wouldn't be really nice power savings if HBM2 were an option. Or as Scott Herkelman says, opportunistic. So in all that table, which is by no means an exhaustive list, we would have 2 Navi 20 GPUs, 3 or 4 Navi 10 GPUs, and potentially as many as 3 Navi 12 GPUs. Wouldn't it make an awful lot more sense to design, say, 3 GPU chiplets, Navi 10, 12 and 20, and then 3 I/O dies, one with HBM controllers, one with GDDR6 controllers, and one for APUs. That would cover every eventuality. Or, as Scott Herkelman says, opportunistic. Now, honestly, I prefer my initial analysis of having this one larger I/O die doing it all, but I can see reasons for why they would like to keep it simpler for now, and I can also see why custom I/O dies could work very well, especially for the game console markets. I think this is a great idea, however, it's going to be a large chip, which means it could be a problem with perhaps larger GPUs, and also if you wanted some HBM or some other type of memory on the package as well. Again, when I saw this on Twitter, I thought, yeah, that's a great idea. Custom I/O dies, also a great idea. But intriguingly, the poster deleted those tweets afterwards. Now, all of that was my own speculation. There was literally nothing out there to suggest any of this was real, except for the rumoured existence of Navi 10, 12 and 20. But as I mentioned, a few days later I received the major Ryzen leak, with a little bit of Navi information in there as well. Now before I go over this part, let me just clarify one thing finally. I got sick of reading the same stuff on Reddit from people who have utterly awful comprehension. Yes, I launched my leak video on the 4th of December, after the Reddit leak appeared on the 2nd of December. However, that does not mean that I simply copied or took the information from Reddit and laid some of my own speculation on top. As I said early in this video, I was still attempting to validate my leaked information when I was told about the Reddit post. Here is the very first email I received from my source, and as you can see on the top right here, it came to me on the 30th of November, so that was 2 or 3 days before there was any trace of the Reddit leak. And clearly most of this has been blanked out in order to protect my source. But posting something on Reddit takes a few minutes. Creating videos with tables, speculation and due diligence takes days. That's why my video was posted after the Reddit leak appeared. But now, let me give you an example of the kind of due diligence I had done over this leak. Just before that, I will once again remind you of what my source told me regarding all of this Navi information. I don't know a lot about the Navi GPUs other than their overall performance, their pricing and branding. Keep in mind that all of this could easily change, as this is just the current plan for the lineup. At the top is the RX 3080, based on Navi 10, coming with 8GB of GDDR6. Performance is between 10% and 15% faster than the RX Vega 64, with a TDP of 150 watts and a price of $250. Below that is the RX 3070, this time based on Navi 12, and again coming with 8GB of GDDR6. Performance is equivalent to RX Vega 56 with a 120 watt TDP and a price of $200. Third was the RX 3060, again based on Navi 12, but this time coming with only 4GB of GDDR6. Performance is equivalent to an RX 580 with 75 watts TDP and a price of only $130. Now, the standout thing for me here was actually the branding of RX 3060, 3070 and 3080 instead of the long speculated RX 600 series. I didn't like it at first, but on closer analysis, it all made perfect sense. First of all, with Nvidia going RTX 2080, 2070 and 2060, AMD are more than justified in one-upping them with the RX 3080, 3070 and 3060. AMD did the same thing with Intel on motherboards with X370 and X399. And in fact, this is something AMD has been doing for a long time. There's a reason why it's Ryzen or R7, Ryzen 5 or R5, and Ryzen 3 or R3. And that reason is Intel's branding of i7, i5 and i3. AMD does this in order for normies to more easily understand where AMD products place against the much better known Intel and Nvidia parts. But anyway, those three Navi cards were the actual graphics cards that my source knew about at that time. And on top of that, they also told me about two new APUs coming with the Zen 2 architecture. There would be a Ryzen 5 3500G based on Navi 12 with 20 compute units. And finally, there would be a Ryzen 3 3300G based on Navi 12, this time with 15 compute units. Now, I can assure you, I was quite intrigued by this for a variety of reasons. Not least of all was when I saw the leak on Reddit a few days later, and we saw that it came with Ryzen 5 3600G with 14 compute units, so just one less than the lower part in my leak, but also a Ryzen 5 3600GX with the same 20 compute units. Those compute unit counts are pretty close. Only a couple of days later, I got the rest of the Navi lineup. I don't believe I've ever given this information, so here it is now. Coming in the third quarter of 2019 is a special anniversary edition card based on Navi 10 again, but there were no more details on memory capacity or memory type. Performance at around 15% higher than the RX 3080 was the current goal, and the card would have a TDP of 180 watts. However, there were no details on the number of compute units yet, but the price was set at $330. Also in the third quarter would be the first Navi 20 GPU. It will have 64 compute units. The performance goal was 20% faster than the RTX 2080 with a goal of 225 watts TDP and a price of $430. Okay, so that was the entire Navi lineup goal. And again, remember what I was told by my source. They didn't know a lot about the Navi GPUs other than their overall performance goals, pricing and branding. Keep in mind that all of this could easily change, and that was just the current plan for the lineup. But still, there were undoubtedly a few alarm bells ringing by this point, and so I quickly got back to my source with some questions. My first question was, did you mean to write 64 CUs for Navi 20? I was expecting more. And the reason I was expecting more is, like most of you following this closely, I had been reading a lot about Big Navi having as many as 96 compute units. But my source got back to me a day later, again before I had launched the video, stating Navi will still be limited to 64 compute units and is the final GCN architecture. The architecture, lovingly referred to online as Arcturus, brings the end of the 64 compute unit limit, along with 7nm plus in 2020. Now, there's a couple of things worth talking about here. First of all current implementations of GCN are indeed limited to 64 compute units, or more accurately, 4 shader engines. This isn't a hard limit of GCN though. However, increasing the limit past 64 compute units would require a fairly major redesign. You'd be looking at adding another 2 shader engines basically. However, if they did do that, then that may be enough to justify the scalable tag that Navi was given a long time ago, and also more recently by David Wang when he said it was flexible and scalable, even though it would likely be only scalable to 6 shader engines instead of 4. I have another idea of what scalable means though, but I'm going to go over that at the end. Perhaps more telling though was when an engineer from the Radeon Technologies group posted that Navi would be upgraded GCN. Now, I was asked not to show that again, so I won't. However, based on that information, I would take it as fact that Navi is still at GCN and it's the last of GCN. But that doesn't necessarily mean it must still be limited to 64 compute units. There is also something else worth noting about the response I got though. That part about the architecture lovingly referred to online as Arcturus. We've known for some time that Arcturus would be the architecture following Navi, right? We saw discussion on it over at Fuzzilla and WCCF, and a host of others in fact. So that line struck me as a bit odd. Why refer to something as lovingly referred to online, unless that wasn't actually the name of the next generation architecture? Well, as it happens, Arcturus is not the name of the next generation architecture, and we can see that from this post over at Reddit a month ago. Arcturus is probably not next gen. This needs to be cleared up before it gets out of hand. This Arcturus meme has spread far and wide over the past few months to the point where I've started seeing it even on tech sites. So I feel I need to clarify this for people who missed the origin of where this codename leaked. The name originated from John Bridgman on the Phoronix forums, who works for AMD and who has been a liaison regarding open source Linux support of AMD hardware. And the codename was specifically mentioned in a post from last September. Now what is actually important is John Bridgman clarified afterwards. Just a reminder, the Arcturus codename refers to a specific chip, not an architecture. Somebody misread my post on Phoronix and thought it was a new architecture, and that has been echoing around the internet ever since. And recently we've seen some evidence of this Arcturus codename, and perhaps the next gen Xbox. But we'll see on that. The point is clear enough. Arcturus is almost certainly not the codename of the next generation GPU architecture, and my source appeared to be well aware of this way back in December. But I still wasn't satisfied. Something about this whole leak didn't quite seem to fit perfectly for me, and I got back to my source immediately with this question. 64 compute units for Navi 20 seems a little low given the 15 and 20 compute units for the Navi 12 GPU that comes with the Ryzen 3000 chips. I'm wondering how that all fits together with the 3 GPUs. So the maximum compute units on Navi 12 was what? The maximum on Navi 10 was what? And it looked like I had been given the maximum on Navi 20 of 64. And you can clearly see that this is on the 3rd of December, again before I had launched the video. I'm just going over this stuff because I sometimes read laughable comments about me not doing due diligence, as I mentioned previously. I'm not only doing due diligence here, I'm asking actual technical questions that do not have easy explanations. In return, I was given this list of CU counts and the following response. So the RX 3060 has 32 compute units, and that is a cut down Navi 12. The RX 3070 is 40 compute units, that is the full Navi 12. The RX 3080 has 48 compute units, and that is a cut down Navi 10. And I was given information that the complete Navi 10 is 56 compute units. And finally, the integrated graphics have been massively improved on the desktop, justifying the price and branding increases from 2200G to 3300G and from 2400G to 3600G. So the final Navi table would appear to be this. And now I finally released the video on the 5th of December, and a few hours later I got a cryptic email from somebody within the Radeon Technologies group, simply saying FF. And that probably doesn't mean much to most of you, but it probably does mean something to those of you who play certain esports like League of Legends, where FF means we concede. I interpreted that as my Navi leak being basically accurate. But then again, I would. Next day after I released the video, my source got back to me with this information. The RX 3000 lineup is branded to match the Ryzen lineup, as it creates a recognisable naming scheme for comparing our products with the competition, which is good for getting OEMs on board with full Ryzen and Radeon powered desktops. And I was also giving a slew of more information on Ryzen. Now, all we had to do next was wait on CES. And well, we all know what happened there. Navi was a no-show. And instead, AMD launched the Radeon 7, based on the 7nm Vega. Now, that same day before the CES show, a person who works within AMD contacted me to tell me that Navi was supposed to be shown at CES. However, it had a manufacturing issue which meant it required a respin, which would set back the card release by at least a couple of months. I talked to this person on the phone and they confirmed other aspects of my leak, though mostly around AMD's planned pricing scheme. But obviously, when you leak information on this level and it doesn't materialise as expected, the spotlight is clearly going to be turned on you. And in fact, almost everything that could have been construed as negative for my leak after that was. One example was over at AnandTech, where the author Ian Curtis was able to get this information out of AMD. AMD stated that, at this time, there will be no version of the current Matisse chiplet layout where one of those chiplets will be graphics. And AnandTech were told that there will be Zen 2 processors with integrated graphics, presumably coming out much later after the desktop processors, but built on a different design. Now, some quarters had analysed that as being extremely bad news for my leak, which showed a Navi GPU and Zen 2 chiplet on the same package. However, as I pointed out in a later video, the reason why there would not be an APU based on Matisse, this package here, is that Matisse is the name of the Zen 2 desktop package, not the mobile package, which is what the previous Zen APUs were based on. For example, Summit Ridge was the desktop Zen, while Raven Ridge was the mobile and APU Zen. But what I didn't tell you during that video is that I too made the same mistake. When I saw this article on AnandTech, I agreed over on Reddit that it looked to be very bad news for the validity of my entire leak. I didn't waste any time in contacting my source with this question. What happened with the G-Series stuff coming later? While obviously linking the AnandTech article. My response came later in the day. I gave you the Q3 2019 launch for the G-Series for a very specific reason, and I'll explain if you look at the quote from that article. And quoting, AMD stated that, at this time, there will be no version of the current Matisse chiplet layout where one of those chiplets will be graphics. And my source went on to explain, the reason for that is the current Matisse layout lacks a lot of the features that the G-Series integrated GPU needs. For example, a specialised I/O die to accommodate things such as HDMI and DisplayPort. What AMD meant by layout referred to the I/O die's layout and not the overall CPU layout. And if you think about it, it is clearly true. The Matisse desktop I/O die has no need for display outputs because it will always be sold with a graphics card. Why waste silicon area on stuff like DisplayPort, HDMI that will not be used? But the G-Series with the APUs, they clearly need a different I/O die and therefore a completely different package with a different name from Matisse. And think about this. I reckon both Ian and myself are considered to be reasonably adept at both a technical and analytical level. Yet both of us missed this, while my source instantly was able to figure out what AMD had done. And AMD do this a lot, just like when Wang and Herkelman moved the story away from chiplets and onto Crossfire on the same package. This no version of the current Matisse chiplet layout where one of those chiplets will be graphics is the same kind of thing. See all these guys that the press talk to, PR guys, etc. These guys are all well versed in responding to us. They are well aware that we are trying to get the really juicy details out of them. And unless you specify exactly what you mean to say, these PR guys will find a way to tell you what you didn't ask, like in the case of Crossfire on a single package. Or they'll find a way to not tell you what you meant to ask. But the important part here though is, my source knew what AMD had said. And incidentally, later in January, and another article over at AnandTech, again by Ian Cuttris, who wrote about AMD pushing the AMD plus AMD strategy with executive promotions. Today, AMD is announcing some realignment of its executive team along with some promotions. The idea behind the changes boils down to AMD wanting to focus its efforts on bringing the CPU and GPU strategy together for future AMD plus AMD combinations. The goal is that users should want to pair Ryzen and Radeon, or EPYC with Instinct, and by aligning the hierarchy behind that goal, it should be easier to manage and achieve. And at the bottom, the idea here is that AMD is going to prioritise a synergy between Ryzen and Radeon. Where did we hear that before? Of course, the Navi 3000 and Ryzen 3000 branding. I have since heard of a potential update to this branding, but I'll talk about that at a later point. But you can chalk up another part of my leak, which came true not so long later. What you take from this is up to you, but with all the information I've given you in this video, I hope it's crystal clear that I am not dealing with some random troll here, and clearly my source has a lot of interesting information, even though it hasn't all been correct, and incidentally, they were quick to admit to that in emails after CES. But it sure wasn't plain sailing after CES. However, the Navi chiplet theory and the leak is still in place, for now at least. And now finally, a couple of videos ago at the end of my Zen 2 Even More EPYC release, I invited you to check out what AMD's Forrest Norrod said at 17 minutes and 22 seconds of his presentation. For those of you who didn't, have a listen now.
But maybe the more important part of chiplet technology is that over time it allows more rapid innovation, because you no longer have to compose just one large monolithic die. If you want to change something, now you can change the I/O chiplet, you can change the CPU chiplet, you can have heterogeneous systems made with CPU and GPU cores intermingled in different chiplets on the same package, allowing, again, architectural innovation.
Now you can have heterogeneous systems made with CPU and GPU cores intermingled in different chiplets on the same package. Remember that scalable thing I talked about earlier? What better way to scale an architecture than scale it at the chiplet level? Now I don't know if Forrest meant GPU chiplets are coming with Navi or coming with what's coming after Navi, but it is now certain. GPU chiplets are coming. Right, I've decided to make this a two-parter for a couple of reasons. First is, there's no way I can finish the rest of this video this week due to it being the Easter break, and I'll be unplugged for the long weekend while I'm off in the middle of the Swedish nowhere. Second reason is, I received information a couple of days ago which has helped me to make this two-parter on Navi very much a game of two halves, to coin the football phrase. Because this video, I'm afraid, is the last of the good news on Navi, at least that I have heard. But we'll hear more about that in part 2 next week, and the anti-video of this one. I'll catch you later, guys.